You had to.
I've not heard that they're not.
Or it had you when you were done.
Oh, yeah.
And you did it by your board. Hey.
Mr. Campbell was getting.
I was getting nervous. I didn't know weird.
That's voting.
I always think it's not gonna get a big, like, girl, but then it's-
I just said, yeah, every 3 years, every 3 years, there's moisture or utilities for disciplines. And as we got.
Trickling.
It's like you say, like, you're like trying to.
Yep.
Stay until you say.
It's just part of the other.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, pull it back. Sorry, before it.
Oh,
So you said, or you think. Still got an edge of spare.
Hey.
that's why I'm walking here.
Just barely. Nate and I got over the last minute.
It could have let her feel really bad there.
Oh, you're fine. I know you say the one that has to be, you don't, sure. Today.
Okay, Google says it's 4:00. Let's call our meeting to order. Paul, can you please take the roll?
Sure. Ms. Falke,
Here.
Mr. Peschel,
Here.
Ms. Tompkins,
Here.
Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. O'Reilly,
Here.
Mr. Eberl,
Here.
Mr. Campbell, I'm here.
Thank you. Nick, was the meeting appropriately noticed?
Yes, I'm actually gonna delegate that to Jessica since she does it every month, so I'll just let her speak. Yeah.
So yes, it was sent out to various media. I was posted here at the MU office, at the library, and at City Hall, as well as online at the city website.
Thank you very much. Number 3, public comment period. At this time, the commission president would recognize members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the commission. Upon recognition by the commission president, persons may take up to 3 minutes to address the commission, first stating their name and address. The commission may take action on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. Do we have any members of the who'd like to speak today?
I do, sir.
Mr.
My name is
Corney?
Dick Corney, live at 113 East 11th Street, right here in beautiful Marshfield. This is my betrothed, Kim Henning. She also lives there. I'm going to talk about, basically it's going to be branched out into 3 different comments, and I believe they're all, they could be all related. But bear with me. I need to know why my house at that address has such a vile chlorine taste. I've been all over the city. I worked here 21 years as an inspector. I was in many people's and businesses, places. But this house just has that terrible, it's worse than up the old school pool. And I mean, when I say all over, I mean, I got good friends like on Westview, Pop Avenue, that's up by one of the water towers for the city. The old city hall where I worked, well, the middle one, because there were 2 previous. Now, I'm from Milwaukee, and I was born in Milwaukee, but traveled all over that whole metro area, including the suburbs and stuff. Drank water out of everything. Never ever had this kind of issue before. And Milwaukee has a lot more miles of piping, which I'll get to in a moment. So again, even now, going back, whatever. Does anyone remember reading about or hearing about the cryptosporidium outbreak crisis or whatever they had in Milwaukee? It's quite a few years ago, probably, I don't know, about 2 decades, probably close. But I was down there, happened to be down there, lived in Amherst, and went down there for a couple's wedding shower, which was kind of new to me. But they had, that's when the city was at its height, and I ended up with it really bad. Actually had symptoms for well longer than 1 year. The point is, within 3 months, I was back there again, and I know they treated their water. I know they took care of the problems. The water was back to the same, no taste, good taste. Even going back to Dave Fosselberg, there was, he fished with me on my big boat on El Goma one time. I kind of pinned his ears back saying, why does this have to be so bad? And he said, well, because we need to treat all the pipes all the way through the system and have a safe level at the farthest point. Well, like I say, Milwaukee has miles and miles of pipe. And they feed also various metro areas too, and they don't seem to have any problem with having to over-chlorinate. Wherefore Blacksman City Hall? Why should their water taste so much better out of the drinking fountains than that 4 blocks away that we live at? The second point is that started in the fall of 2023. The city was, well, I didn't know that at the time, but we had clouds and clouds of yellow color. Nasty, vile tasting water, but yellow. And it overwhelmed our drinking filter. We got 3 taps that are on the drinking filter. So it would, instead of them lasting nearly a month, we're changing them once a month now. That's a lot of cost increase for me as a homeowner, for us. Another example, our whites and linens are yellow. And that shouldn't happen either in our good water. We've got to throw them out after a while. They're dingy with yellow. You've got to like blue and white something or another sheet, and you might as well get rid of it. We have bone color, that light color they call bone toilets. Many times we go to look in the toilet and it looks like somebody already was there urinating because there's yellow in it. Very dark yellow. And of course nobody had been, but if you lift up the toilet tank, it's solid yellow water. Now, I took this all to Scott at Gaffney's, and a number of people here would know him, and he's a really good guy, and means a lot to that business, and the same from them. I talked to him, he didn't have an answer. He didn't have a clue. He did not know. He said he heard somebody else had that same problem, but that was it.
Iron.
Hmm?
That's not iron.
Yeah. Anyways, he asked me to bring 4 samples in. I took one before the drinking filter. I took one from the bottom of the water heater, another from the supply to at the toilets, and then after that drinking filter I was talking to. And we got some water, one's after the filter, and start with the anyway, so you can see yellow. This one came out of the toilet, I guess, but you can see it easier on the white piece of paper.
For the toilet.
If you pass them around, it'd be good.
Does it help? Oh, I said,
So, anyways, I know Scott talked to Eric, and I don't know who Eric in water is, but anyways, he got no answer from me to give me from what Eric told me. Scott tested all my samples, and he tested them every little bit, could not discern what the yellow was, but usually when piping like that, it's iron, yeah, or in it, that colors, that can color. Well, the softener works great. I went over there to see if he'd get me a new water softener and filter and stuff. Well, he checked all that out and said, you don't have to. It works great. Iron is down, the hardness is down. But for Scott, the softener should not pass that yellow color because it acts as a filter also, especially in terms of the liquid yellow. But it's not doing that. Third, I don't even know if this is a reaction from Marshfield Utilities. I call this section the inspector, okay? Months ago, I came home, was in a hurry to race back out, and some young man came around the corner to the back door as I was racing out, and he never gave me his name, but he had a coat with Marshfield Utilities. I think it was a black coat or whatever. Now, I said, I'm going. I have to go. I got Norb Conrady and a bunch of others out there. Got to do sausage and my specialty also, corned beef. From scratch corned beef. He said, it'll only take a minute. I said, what? He said, I got to inspect. I said, what? The piping. I told him. In 2002, this whole house was totally rewired, replumbed, new HVAC, and also some new construction in that all three of the city inspectors, I couldn't do it myself, so we had to get a stand-in who was a contractor, master electrician, but they all inspected it. In fact, a lot of contractors walked in because they just wanted to see me, or maybe while I was doing the work. But it could have been the beer that was bringing them along. I don't know that, but so it kind of confused me that the city looked at all these things. And we have great plumbing inspectors. We always have, including Dilly, I think is now ours, Dillenberg. Well, so we were still outside in all this when I told him all that stuff. But he had a CO. So we get to the basement, laundry room where the supply comes in, and the major branching takes off from there, and all my stuff is exposed down there, other than the walls where the washer and dryer are. But he's standing there just looking around. Finally, after about 3 minutes, I said, what are you looking for? He said, lead pipes. Now I'm thinking, if he can't tell the difference between copper and lead, there's something wrong with this. So I said, again, 2002, everything was changed. And he goes back to staring. Now I'm supposed to go. I should have been going. And I finally go, now what? He goes, looking for lead joints. And I said, more than a decade before I remodeled it in 2002, well more than that, the federal government and the state of Wisconsin outlawed lead in plumbing, piping, and fixtures. But I don't think you could tell a difference, because at a glance, if you know what you're looking for, it's real easy to tell by the color of the material. So,
Take 1 more minute.
1
more minute.
Oh, holy cow. Well, I asked him about the yellow cloud stuff, and he had no clue. He told me I should flush my line out onto the lawn, and I said, I don't want to spend that kind of money, and he said, well, we'll take the meter out. I said, no, you guys, Marshfield Utility, they want to do this, they want to help this problem, they have to do it. It's not going to be my time, my money, my hose, more anything, because I didn't create this problem. So, anyways, finally after nearly 25 minutes, he left that 1 minute marker. well behind. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Is there anything of urgency in this?
No, we'll follow up with them because of this, new details that we were not aware of.
All right. Thank you. Number 4, commissioner and staff comments. Do we have any commissioner comments to start tonight? Any staff comments today?
Yeah, we have a couple for tonight. Joe, if you want to kick us off?
Sure. The end of winter moratorium is April 15th, tomorrow. What that means for our customers is that we begin disconnection for non-payment. So the press release went out with this information on April 3rd. We also included disconnect notices in the form of inserts in the mail. We're sending out calls, texts, and emails in an attempt to try to reach these customers to try to handle these as early as possible so that we prevent disconnection. So.
Sure, just letting everyone know we are again doing our business customer appreciation brat Friday, May 8th this year. And it's again going to be a pre-order pickup event. And we have the announcement out there in the customer newsletter, and we'll be getting it through the Mackie and a few other ways so that people know that it's coming. But each year we can grill about 1,000 brats, and probably 24, 25 different businesses have taken part in the past. So,
Including the city.
including the city, yep.
And then lastly, Tony, update on a couple of things.
So we've got a couple flags here. One of them is from the RP3. So this is the APPA's tool or way that they can recognize public utilities that operate at a high level. So there's really 4 areas of criteria they're evaluating this on: reliability, safety, workforce development, and finally system improvements. So we go through a pretty rigorous application process to basically submit all the information that shows that we're meeting the metrics that they're looking at. We were re-recognized at the diamond level status, which is the highest level. So this runs for 3 years, and then the application window opens up again. I believe this is several years, maybe even 3rd or 4th opportunity that we've been recognized at this level. So just kind of doing what we can to keep it up. Another one is that I don't have the placard update here, but we did achieve the excellence in reliability again. That's an annual update. So we're operating in essentially the top quarter or the top quartile here. They evaluate the duration. So basically how many minutes, if you have an outage, how many minutes does the restoration time take? So again, our targets are right where we want them to be at that 90 minutes or less. That's something we have in our KPIs, and we're generally always meeting or exceeding that goal. So, and then the last one was our Safety of Excellence Award that we got, again, from APPA. Melissa can probably give a little bit more detail on the safety award than I can.
Sure, so we were recognized at the diamond level for the safety award as well. That one's actually an annual award we apply for each year. And it's looking at the total number of hours worked, and then kind of they have a formula where they factor in any injuries that we have, any time lost, and so forth. And it's looking at all of the hours for not only our electric crews, but all of the staff minus out the water folks. So even those of us in the office, we have to be safe as well. So pretty happy to get the gold award again on that one.
And I was that to the reliable, the RP3 designation, there's only 12% of the 2,000 public power utilities like ours that actually receive a recognition. And of that, we're in the top tier of it. So it just kind of speaks to, and the criteria, as Tony mentioned, is quite rigorous. I'm actually on the grading side, so I grade all the part of a group nationwide that grades all the applications. It's a rigorous process, and basically we're trying to set the benchmarks of highest level of business operations continuity in those different areas as the metrics or the marks, and to that we're meeting or exceeding that. So it just shows the strength of our organization.
Good job. All right, number 5, Greasy Park Playground.
Yes, so in February, I know some are here tonight, the group from the leadership Marshfield came and presented on a project to update the playground equipment at Creasy Park. Since then, they've made some great strides in their fundraising efforts. And additionally, they were able to provide us some renderings, which I included in the packet for you to see. Kind of get an idea of what the finished product or project might look like. The packet also, can't say the word. The memo included a document that showed the different levels of support for the project, along with the logo and name recognition. And this was something that the commission talked about in February and then asked to be brought back. So I'm bringing it back tonight for your review and consideration. Well, since you guys both made the time, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to highlight or cover.
Yep, so just as a reintroduction, Abby Meyer with Stop Construction.
Bill Thomas with Prevention Genetics.
So ultimately, we wanted to come here tonight to make an official ask. And I just wanted to say, listening to some of the public comments, I've been to a lot of meetings like this in my past life prior to Stop as a consulting engineer. There will always be problems in the world, always in communities. But one thing that brings joy, no matter what, is playgrounds. For kids, for any age really, just to watch kids play, it's a big deal. We're extremely passionate about it, and we know that projects like this don't succeed unless we have anchor support from some of those big entities. Marshfield Utilities is one of those for our community. We had a goal of 500,000 with this project, and we are currently at 465,000 in 3.5 months. It's been a huge outpouring of support, but we needed to continue because we've actually raised our goal to $750,000 total, and we're not going to raise it again. That's the final goal, to put that port in place rubber surfacing that everybody wants so bad. We did a little bit of a survey on our Facebook page, and we had 12,000 views in one day in this community, crazy, and almost 200 comments, and everybody said they want that port in place rubber surfacing. So we want to make that happen. Ultimately, like I said, we need support from bigger entities like you guys to do that. So we're here tonight to ask for a donation of $50,000, or at least your consideration of it. We know that's a large amount, but you would be recognized on all of our banners and documents going forward for marketing. We're having a family fun event here coming up at the existing playground, date to be announced there. And then we'll also be having a couple other events that we announce here through the summer and into the fall. So site preparation is happening this fall as well, with the playground being constructed next spring, unless we can make a miracle happen and have it all prior to that. So ultimately, I guess that's what we're here to ask from you guys tonight.
And then kind of the icing on the cake too, we have construction or
Excavating
looks like they're going to donate
the site preparation.
site. So, and there's other few things that we have in the works too as well. But as of right now, are just totally blown away by this community as it is to see how much money we've raised so quick. Obviously, this park means a whole lot to a whole lot of people. And like I said, nowadays with the kids being sucked into the voids of electronics and stuff, parents need to get the kids out of the house. They need to get out and play and get away from all this stuff. And this playground is going to meet and exceed that.
So the renderings that you did receive are not final. We're making the perimeter concrete more natural. It's not gonna be squares and rectangles. And then we're also making the playground a lot bigger. Zip lines aren't shown on there, but we are hoping to incorporate zip lines. And actually, we're making it quite a bit bigger than what it's shown. I think it's 9,000 square feet. We're gonna go as big as 15,000 square feet, just to allow room for more structures in the future if somebody wants to take this on as another leadership project. So that's not the final version, but we will unveil that soon as we have Parks and Rec blessing. So
it's been amazing. And like I said, kind of like with port in place flooring, people have also brought up installing equipment for adult workout. That's kind of a big thing, especially being with the bike path, gives the adults something to do, and even some of the kids will play on that stuff too. There's several other things, like I said, this is going to be an all-inclusive playground. So having the port in place, for handicap wheelchairs, strollers is going to be a big thing. We're looking at the path kind of doing like an oval shape, possibly something like that with bump outs, with benches. But it looks like some of them might even have shades on them. There's talk about maybe even putting a little pavilion, the shaded pavilion off to the side, getting some picnic tables, making this into, a park that's
you know, like a real playground park. There's talk in the future that the bike path is going to be headed farther north into the neighborhood, so that'll actually help bring a little more kid traffic, a little safer off of the roads instead of cruising down the roads like they do right now. They do a lot more onto the bike path, so it's going to be an ever-growing situation. And like I said, we want to make it a little bit larger, so that way if some other donations come in later, so we can maybe add a little bit more to it, or if somebody else put it, another leadership program wants to add a little bit more or do something that we can. That's basically the gist of it. And like I said, I'm just blown away by how giving this community is, and being new to the neighborhood, not knowing how famous this park is, but it's like a really big deal for this place. So, you know, like I said, you can give us, be awesome.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to make a motion? And if you're going to make a motion, I would suggest that we follow the path we've done in the past, where we maybe approve an amount and leave the negotiating of what sponsorship there is up to the general manager.
Can I ask you a question? We have to do a motion.
Yeah.
Because the question was gonna help my motion.
All right.
Does anyone remember how much we need pickleball?
35, I think.
No, I think it was like a golden pickle.
Sounds like 75.
75.
75.
It was a 5 minute.
Okay.
Does that help you make
That
it?
helps me make my motion. Okay, so I would make a motion that we would give out of the commission designated fund $75,000 to this.
With the
Oh, with-
that's left for the sponsorship to be negotiated.
Yes,
by the
yes,
general
absolutely.
manager. Is there 75,000 in the commission designated fund?
Oh, yeah.
There is 342,000 currently in their grant. There is some of those dollars that have already been spoken for with EV charging. Just, do you want a second before I want
Yeah.
to?
We have a motion. Do we have a second for that? Second by Nate.
Within your guide, it shows 150. You'll work with us to find a median at 75.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If the need is passes, obviously.
Any discussion? We have a motion and a second. No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're-
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll let you back to your fund.
Well, the fun is over.
It was the fun.
We're gonna miss some.
Those nice letters to,
Reviewing investment policy number 1285.
It's, so during the audit process, there were two items that were noted, well, there were a number of items noted, but there were two specifically with this policy that basically we need to review and maybe make some adjustments. The first relates to how the maximum of 25% of total investments is calculated. So as you read the policy, you'll note that it indicates that, we should try to diversify from a risk perspective, and it caps it at 25%. However, it doesn't say how that number should be calculated. So in the packet, we included a red line that basically indicates that it would be calculated based on the initial investment. So it's clear that that's where the calculation is coming from. The second item that came up in the process, through the audit process, was that we determined that we actually were exceeding that threshold by a few percentage with one particular investment with the Federal Home Loan Bank program, which is backed by the U.S. government. Ultimately, that does have a low risk, but given the way the policy is written, we were exceeding it at 27% versus the 25% that the commission had placed in the policy. I should note that the 25% is something that's set at this body. It's not, there's no state or federal regulations that are that dictate that value. So it gives you guys some flexibility. So the question that we were bringing forth for your consideration is in how you want to rectify the situation with the being slightly over. Patty and I have adjusted our processes to help guard against that in the future. And we already have a process that really looks at any CD holdings that we have to make sure they're all unique. And this is just another piece that we added. So I guess a couple of options is you could obviously change the policy from 25% to something larger. You could add the Federal Home Loan Bank program as another item that's exempted, if you will, from that threshold. We could sell one of our current holdings with Federal Home Bank loan short, if you will, at a loss. Or we could just recognize the fact that we are slightly over And that the first opportunity that comes along in the future when the holding matures, that at that time we would make the necessary steps to put us back into compliance. Just recognizing that maybe, I think the next maturity is in March of 2026.
Is the reason, is it, did we go over by the 2% or whatever it is due to market performance or some factors like that caused it to be that higher number? Or is it the way that we made this deal, or we made the investment at the wrong amount?
I think it's partly a couple factors. I think, our controls need to be adjusted. That's part of it. I think the other part of it is if you look at the investments in the cash status later on, you'll see that typically, a CD, we take out a CD at $245,000 because the FDIC insurance level is $250. So once you get the interest earnings, you bump up to that. With the Federal Home Loan Bank program, we're getting similar to or even better interest rates, but we can invest $1 million or even $2 million. So it made it really easy to get into those types of investments. And I think just a combination of that going on, plus some things maturing and maybe being moved into from maybe a CD into our cash holding or our LGIP bank, those different things, moving those things around created some changes in the percentages as well. So a number of factors.
Because that sort of makes a difference if it's as a result of the markets, that it just got to that point without without coming to maturity.
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference rather than, we invested at this level and it was too.
Yeah, so if you look at it from interest earnings compared to potential earnings, if you will, the percentage changes slightly, but not drastically.
Yes.
Could we change it to kind of like a tiered thing where it's like 25 is the suggested cap, but then if there's for lack of a better word, like a good deal elsewhere, that there's a 5% contingency or like the board approval or something, it could be.
This is a commission policy. Write it however complicated you want to make it.
Yeah.
The only component of that I would caution you on is asking us to bring it back to you for approval. Typically, we get them in the morning and they want to know by the end of the day if we want to make that investment or not. Because it ultimately, we're not the only ones trying to invest, so others will snatch up the opportunity and won't be available if we have to wait for a commission meeting timing. But definitely you could provide a 5% buffer or something.
Mm-hmm.
How we'd like to frame it up.
Hey, if the funds had to be moved from there, do you have any idea where they would be placed next? What's the next best option?
They would probably temporarily go into LGIP or into the money market that we hold with we have a money market with the Royal Bank of Canada that helps us with the administration of that. And it would hold there until we find another opportunity. Obviously, we're in a interesting times with the markets and where they're going, so we would try to maximize our potential return. And we'd reach back out to our contact with RDC and say we have an additional X dollars and they would look to try to help us invest it. But just keep in mind, most of the holdings, especially the one that matures in 26, and you think back, a lot of those date to right around pre-COVID, early COVID. So if you look at the interest rates, you'll see they're in that 0 to 1% range. So we have, in order to be comparable to the current market at 4 or 5, you'd have to pay a premium to get that type of interest return or discount them. So we take a loss.
Yeah. So pretty much, would you say that they're equivalent to the treasuries as far as risk? So it's backed by the federal
I'm
government.
not an expert, so they're all backed by the federal government, which I think is good. However, I think we all can see there's a lot of change going on in Washington right now. I don't think that incorporates any new risk, but there's a lot of change going on.
So it just seems like that's our best option as far as we use it, and to limit ourselves and put ourselves in a similar higher risk option for less return. I guess just being our internal policy.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. This happened Now, how do we extricate ourselves from it? But there's also is the 25% still the right number? Because, I mean, if you're saying, hey, that's by far and away the best option, we want to put everything there, then, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to push back on that.
Yeah.
25% of your investment portfolio in one thing is pretty high concentration already. I wouldn't want to see it go above that.
So you do more than that for ATC. I know it's not included in that, but if we included ATC as a total assets as far as cash invested, then that would be below 25%. But since we're not, it is creating a little higher up. And so there's more risk somewhat in ATC than in that particular investment than in here. So then,
Yeah.
The transmission lines aren't likely gonna go away, but points well taken. I think the other component, when you think about your own private investment strategy, there's a preflow of options here because of us being a government. We have a very limited subset as well. So that's another component that may require you to actually have a higher percentage in different buckets because of just the limited number of areas that you can invest in.
Is LGIP limited to 25% under this policy also?
And I believe it's exempted in the line.
That one's exempted.
so it's the US Treasury's LGIP bank
It means
accounts,
LGIP, okay.
all three of them.
Tasha's got a question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to find where it actually
Okay.
said. Go ahead.
As far as like we're over it now, so the question of we're already in it, how do we get out of it? I think it's okay if, in my opinion, if we waited until next spring and then we could readjust so that we don't have that loss. My question is for the other entities that are exempt, what percentage do we have in those entities?
Nowhere near that much.
Well,
We have to do some math. We don't have enough time reference.
they're all going to be smaller though. Yeah. Because it's limiting individual investments to a maximum of 25% of total investments. So because this is one entity that we've invested a bunch in, because they don't have the FDIC insurance limit.
It's under diversification by the red text.
Yeah, I found it. Okay. I was just looking at it, trying to think, if we exclude US Treasury securities because of the government guarantee, does the Federal Home Loan Bank, which is also federally guaranteed. But at that point, you would be eliminating basically everything except CDs.
I was gonna say that was, we could go to 50% on this. If we.
And if you exclude everything, you then have to have some other limit.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Yes, Nick?
I don't think we should change the limit because then you're gonna, whatever you change it to, you're gonna bump up to it sooner or later anyway, and perhaps exceed it again. I agree with Tasha, I think that, that we'll let it go to the maturity date in February and then reinvest it at a rate that's gonna be within the limits. I think as long as we're making our investments within our limits of our policy, we're okay, even if they eventually exceed that amount.
So you're saying historical cost, back to the first point.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you on that for the types of investments that are here.
Yeah, I'd agree with Nick, on both points, it's back to the initial, and then when it does happen, if we go over again, we wait until something matures, there's no sense in costing us money just to get out of it.
So if we understand the math, unless the cash reserve, goes up by a large number, then they're not going to invest any into that entity that's at the threshold until spring of 26 when that rolls off.
Yeah.
So then your question of what's the second best option is where it's going to go.
Why go down a percent just to avoid a risk that isn't there?
Well, but you are yeah, is there risk? I don't know if
That one,
there's a government guarantee on the Federal Home Loan Bank, but I don't know if it's the same as the federal government, US Treasury.
yeah, no, good question. Those are parallel through the 250,000 and yes, the insured bank accounts.
Yeah. Yes.
Just so I'm clear, you're both many of you are indicating, let's just wait till it matures. And at that time, we'll be back into matching what the requirements of the policy are. However, when it comes time to reinvest those dollars, if there's an opportunity to get a premium interest rate that would then put us back above that percentage, you would be okay with, or are you saying go to the second best option? Just
Well, I would say go up to the maximum of your limit for.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Don't exceed the top.
Exceed the 25.
Historical cost.
Even if it goes from 5% to 2%, that as far as the interest earnings, you still aren't, that's probably drastic. Just want to make sure.
But assume that you'd be in a market where you have a 2 and a 5% to choose from.
Right, exactly.
Which is unlikely.
It depends on where that sweet spot is, because but what we're cashing out is $5 million, let's say. And you got the room then again to get up to 25%, they're reinvesting 4 of it.
Yeah.
Into that. And then just the other 1 million would have to go to something else.
So I'm hearing consensus on historical cost. I'm hearing consensus on keep the 25%. I'm hearing consensus on let this fix itself over time.
One more caveat that I just want to throw out there to make sure we understand this. If you think about, we just did a nearly $9,000 dividend payment. That's a pretty substantial amount of cash. The day before, and I look at the percentage breakdowns, they're X. The day after, I look after the percentages are going to change. So as we think about capital investment at some point in the future, that could create, unknowingly, we may exceed that cap again. We're riding right at 25%, and tomorrow we decide to spend off a couple $1 million in cash for a project that we're going to take out LGIP or cash or other more liquid funds. It's going to create that percentage to go up.
But wouldn't that, you're still talking initial investment, right? So if you didn't surpass that with your initial investment, it really wouldn't play into what happens down the road. Even the way I see it, even the way this exceeds right now, did we actually surpass their 25%? Or are there outside
Security, now that security A went from 25 to 27. The next funding is going to be out of LGB. Tried that, I don't know how high.
Yeah.
But you couldn't buy any more of it until the whole pool went up. Nick?
What's the rationale on basing on initial investment? Because the interest that we receive from it goes right back into it, I presume. And so why would we base it on the initial?
So are you going to do, what about unrealized versus realized? You're talking realized gains versus unrealized, so it's a component that the auditors like to look at as unrealized gains.
Yeah.
In that case, are you looking at the interest compounded at that every year annually? If you have a 5-year, are you looking at what the earnings were for that year? And then adding on to that, or are you looking at the end of it, at the end of the 5-year term? just a number of variables that have to be spelled out, so that makes it easier.
Yeah.
Initial, but no, you could take it a lot of different routes.
Stay away from the unrealized.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's just too much work.
He doesn't want to zero hundreds of thousands of dollars and realize it's actually above this, it's not being counted then.
There are.
It's not actually part of the value of
Yeah.
the investment.
Right.
You know, like if you were to sell it, that interest doesn't matter to the person buying it. You know what I mean? Like the interest rate does, but not what we've already earned essentially.
So on the balance sheet, which number's on there?
The balance sheet is just the investment.
Investments.
Yeah, the interest earnings are in the interest earnings.
Those are in the income sheet.
Okay, so they're not being invested then.
If your CD expires,
Mm-hmm.
you get your interest.
Yep.
You're taking the interest as cash. You're not bumping up because they're at the 245 if they're buying a CD.
Okay.
So they're trying to stay under that FDIC limit.
Yep.
On the home loan, same thing, you're getting the interest in cash and you might reinvest it into another issue.
Yep.
Yeah, I think with the change to the policy was proposed. We're going
And by change, do you mean
the red line.
historic?
Yes. Yes.
But I think you had this, before I decided to add an extra caveat, I think you had it framed up as that the red line's good and that ultimately the consensus was to allow the maturities to occur and then try to correct ourselves in March next year. And if we have more problems or challenges, to bring it back to the commission after that point.
I think you had it right.
So we probably need to do a little some action.
Is there a motion to approve the red line version with that one change?
Yeah. I still move.
Motion second by Nick.
I'd rather have these challenges than the opposite.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. First things first, let's get these back, heavy back that way. And then we move on to number 7. Utility restricted fund.
So there was an initiative in the strategic plan that you approved back in December that focused on enhancing the utilities restricted fund policy. Currently, the utility has 3 restricted funds. So one is our M1 maintenance fund, one is a customer contribution, and the second is is the commission designated. Just a high level review of those 3. I think you're all familiar with the commission designated fund. Obviously, there's a fund there. The downside is that the revenue source or the increasing of those funds has gone away, given changes to the dividend. The customer contributions fund it's used for when we have large projects. I think in my years at the utility, we haven't actually used that fund. It's been whether you're talking hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to help support a customer project. But it's good to have that in case there was a situation where it would come up. And then the M1 maintenance fund is one that's obviously we've talked about a little bit through the years to help support the M1 if we ever had a major maintenance. I would note that what's unique about that fund is that on the surface, you have revenue from operating and having the power plant, and you see it going into that fund, less the expense of the natural gas or the fuel oil. However, that revenue also goes back to our customers. So we are taking cash reserves to help build that fund. So it's not as though there's a direct revenue source that's getting passed into a fund. It's actually coming in, going to our customers, and then on the books, we're saying, oh, taking cash reserves and putting it into the fund so that we have it earmarked for that. Just want to make sure we're clear on that. I say all that is that tonight, the hope is just to have some initial discussion and guidance from the commission on how you'd like to see changes to the restricted funds. What new funds maybe we want to develop. I try to provide some questions in the memo just to help with the conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways that this can go. And a lot of, I think challenges will be about, setting up a framework, but also where the revenue comes to help, and then how the funds will be used. So with that, I'll kick it back to you guys.
This looks fun. So Before we move on to the gist of this, the customer contributions fund, does it have a number that's set that if it's over X, that fund gets used? And if not, should there be a number set?
I'm not aware of an amount at this point. Generally, during my time, I don't know of any customer project that exceeded 100,000.
No, I don't remember what that was. I remember we used it once when it was created and
So
since
the
then.
question is, do we really need it at all? There's no criteria to use it.
See, what happens is if you have a large customer that comes in, let's say it's $1 million to help support them, it's really a way to, segregate those funds out, they get interest earnings, all of that stuff has to be rectified when the project is complete. And that's all the way back to them. So it's just a way of tracking. I guess we could do it without the special fund per se.
Yeah, it helps kind of keep it visually so people know like that cash isn't necessarily ours, like that cash may have to go back,
That has value.
to the customer.
And in some of these projects, especially on larger ones like that, you may be talking multiple years.
Why wouldn't you use it for small ones?
And there's a specific reason.
Okay. Paul, you have a question?
Well, it just seems to me we already have it designated. I think it's not hurting us to keep it, at least to my knowledge. I'd rather have it there so that if somebody did walk in the door and say, here's $100,000, but I want you to build a new water tower, we can put it towards it. It's in a fund and it stays there until we need it. Should there be a max? Possibly. But I think if a person comes in with a large donation and wants it all to go to one thing, then I think we need to deal with that. It's supposed to say, there's a cap on that. Because we don't know what's in the hole.
So I'm not sure if I understand, because I think it's not a donation, it would be a deposit that a customer was making during a construction and and we're ultimately, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, returning that deposit to them.
Yeah, potentially all of it, or at least a portion of it, depending on how the final cost comes in, and then mostly on the electric side. This doesn't happen as much on water, because normally a new development, let's say a new customer, you can take a subdivision, for instance, the developer is actually responsible for all the improvements, and they do the install for our specifications, and then we monitor and track that. And that's considered contributed capital, and that goes through a different mechanism. This is more on the electric side, generally, where we're building infrastructure we're doing that internally with our own staff, to extend power lines, wherever it might be. Maybe it's a new substation, something like that, then that cash would come, and then there are rebates or credits that apply depending on the size and type of customer it is, and then that gets counted against the final cost of the project. So.
Natasha,
Can we go back up to the policy statement? I just had some questions about the cash on hand. First of
back up to
all,
where?
am I in the right place? Am I in the right one? And are we on the cash reserve policy?
No.
We're on utility
Restricted funds.
Oh, I just want to.
Save the question for the next.
I will, thank
I
you.
think she's on the right policy.
Yeah, I think you're on the right one. Utility restricted funds is the
Yeah.
cash policy.
Oh, okay,
I'm
but
sorry.
we're still on this first page, no problem, I'll wait.
So we basically want to come up with a revised definition of, or discuss about what should be reserved or restricted funds, I should say. See, some of these are unrestricted, from what I see just on our sheets here, the cash account status, there's things that are unrestricted that actually normally I would consider restricted because they're not really funds to be used for anything else other than what it says. But yet it says unrestricted. So for instance, cafeteria plan, under unrestricted funds would be 135.4. Those funds are designated for a specific thing. So it seems like it should be restricted in my opinion. Another one under there would be forward savings pilot reserve, which are funds that we're designating specifically for that tax. in lieu of payment in lieu of tax, so that seems to be restricted. So those should, I think, personally, I think those should be moved from unrestricted to restricted because they're being set aside for a specific purpose. I got different comments, I don't know if we want to jump.
Do we have a definition of restricted versus unrestricted? Does that come from ESC or anything, or do?
I think restricted is there's some document basically telling us we have to keep it for a specific reason, like the bond govern, documents that say we're required to hold X amount of money in reserve. And then utility restricted is obviously, commission based, I think, and then unrestricted is what's left.
So that makes sense under restricted, you need debt service, construction, and main replacement. Main replacement came from the PSC, so that would be legally restricted.
Right.
And everything else is, I love your term, designated, but technically it's not legally restricted.
I think the actual legal term of restricted that commissions could use is money that you're setting aside for a specific purpose. I mean, I think, double check, but I think it's more of an internal control for us of what we want restricted because it's set aside for a specific.
So I think for tonight, whatever we should focus on, what do we want to have things set aside for? And let's get more information on the legality of restricted versus unrestricted.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And moving along that line then, Nick did a nice job of kind of, asking which way your brain wants to work to start with. Do you want to talk about emergencies? Do you want to talk about projects? Do you want to talk about, future ideas? What types of things do you see wanting to have money in a pot for? Yes,
Sorry.
I need a big mirror out there. That I can see.
In terms of emergency type funds, that's kind of interesting to me, just especially because of how things like in politics are kind of all over the place. So my question is, what do we do in terms of emergency savings or something like that? Do we have anything like that? If something comes up that is emergency, that we need to fix something, or something goes really bad, or for some reason we're cut off or something like that, do you have anything? Or is that just cash reserves that we use?
Well, M1 has the specific fund, the maintenance fund, but typically the other items, are coming out of cash reserves. It might be, normally there isn't a specific budget per se for emergencies because they're just, we'll talk about main breaks in a little bit, 1 year it's 25, next year it's gonna be 50. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that, and it's just the cost of doing business, but you're right, it just essentially just comes out of the cash. And part of the reason we need to maintain a healthy cash reserve for one of the reasons, so we're able to, ride the wave, if you will, what events that may occur.
Has there ever been any major emergency events where it costs us, I don't know, $250,000 plus?
Yeah, I think that ice storm, last, was it 2 years ago, 23?
December.
December 22, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. I should note that FEMA right now is, obviously with the federal government's going through a bunch of changes. FEMA is something that's, I'm sure you've heard about, read about it. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen with FEMA. So it's going to put even more, pressure on utilities to make sure they're solving the bills to respond to situations.
So when we were, I think the last APPA thing we were at in DC, they were talking about trying to get something approved that FEMA would at least pay interest during the time it takes them to, they commit to making a payment or people, and then it might be years before they receive that payment. So they're trying to at least get them to commit to pay interest during the time that they're sitting on money.
Yeah.
So the utility might be funding it for 2, 3, 4 years before they get that money back.
And there's a question now, was that bill's out there, there's a question, is FEMA still gonna provide funding at all? That's one question. The next question is FEMA gonna provide block grants, or they're gonna be administered at the state level? What does that mean? So it's just, that's a whole nother conversation, but you can, I think it's part of the reason we want to make sure that we're in a good, healthy position so that we can ride those situations. But, you know, you lose a transformer, you can be talking multiple millions of dollars in a substation pretty quickly. You know, tornadoes, obviously, and we're seeing those, we're seeing ice storms, ice storms that we have in the past. You know, weather's just different to some degree. So all of those are situations where you can pretty quickly spend a lot of money, unfortunately.
Transformers, when you talk about just the price increase you've seen on those in the last few years.
Yeah.
Just a couple different comments on, like how you will have the questions against the start of the discussion. So I'll just jump to the second one. So should we focus on the project-based funds? I personally think we should have designated funds for community projects that we're already working towards. That would make sense in my opinion. And also having a depreciation fund, which we're sort of doing already within there, that makes a lot of sense. And then, I think for the emergency, that's why we have a healthy cash reserve. I agree that once we have these designated funds set aside for depreciation items, for special projects, for covering interest or the debt service on our loans would be another good one. And one for pilot payments. So I kind of look at it as a fund that has it covered for repair, replacement of infrastructure or additional capital for future projects would be one. And then debt service would be another one. And then other ones such as taxes or pilot payments, I guess. Commission something.
Natasha?
So some of this is just accounting, housekeeping, right? Of saying, we're gonna put them in funds so we know how much money we have in funds. My question is, if we set up some of these funds, or is our cap of money the same and we're just shifting them into different funds? Or are we raising rates so that we can fill up these funds?
I think there's somewhere in between. I mean, I don't know that we're looking to shift. I don't know that the purpose is to shift what's in the cash reserve today, although there is something in the cash reserve today that says for unforeseen things. And if you move to a depreciation fund where you are setting aside for this piece of equipment and that piece of equipment, that there's a shift there of some of them. The funding piece is a distant second.
I feel like when I look through the financial statements, like the depreciation is already being calculated. So if it's already being calculated from the rates, to me, it just seems fair to just move it and not raise rates to like set what we're for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the PSC won't allow us to raise rates to create a fund. They are more based on build it, then depreciate it and get revenue to offset that expense, either by paying the cash or taking out debt. So there'll be no raising of rates to help this how it has to be managed within the confines of how we're operating today. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second, so if it's basically taking what we have for cash and reallocating it, or if you want to grow the cash and allocate the new part, that's you have to give us that directive, and then we'll run with that from a budgeting perspective. We'll run with that from our budgets and how we present those to you, so that we're either building more cash, if you will, using new revenue sources, things of that sort to fill in those gaps. So that's really up to your choice on how you want to do that.
I think just to add to what you're saying too, is one of the problems I think we're trying to fix with this is it looks like without having more designated funds, the restricted funds set aside for specific things, it's harder to see why there's so much money on in our funds here. And so right now, the average person looking at this could say, why don't we cash this out and give a dividend to all citizens? Because there is so much money there, and it's not clear what we're using it for. And so it'd be nice to show that of this guy covers depreciation, it's covering future bill or power supply, whatever it might be. Otherwise, it's hard to justify that much money if it's not designated or something.
I think that's a great part of what's being said, and I think there's another level to that, which is when you take those future projects in, you're telegraphing what those future projects are that are not, unless you sit and watch the minutes here or watch our discussions, you're not knowing that we're talking about potentially doing X or potentially doing Y. But if you're starting to build cash toward that, you can see it.
Then you can justify it. And another one on potential could be is the ATC, is right now there's $10 million potentially coming up for calls on that, which would significantly lower some of those funds way down. So just, yeah, exactly. People have asked us why do you have so much money? Maybe the city should be able to get at it, but there really isn't as much money as it looks like.
I think the additionally to that, even with the depreciation fund, depreciation is historical cost. And so when you put an asset into infrastructure today and we're looking at replacing it way out in the future, well, that's going to be a vastly different amount out in the future. So if we don't start actually thinking about that today, we're going to be behind it always on the financing treadmill.
Yes.
Always at the danger of whatever the interest rate of the moment is.
I agree. I think it leads up to another point, if I can make it, is that, so when we review our days of cash on hand target, that last bullet point, how do we treat the cash in these funds? And that would be, well, my comment on that, why it's related would be number one, the days cash on hand calculation that we've used, I presume, is the number of days that we can cover operational expenses, right? And so the calculation that we're using for cash on hand is basically a calculation of how many days we cover up operating expenses. The depreciation is a non-operating expense. And so these funds are covering things outside of operating expenses, right? And it kind of all works together, like you're trying to figure out how many days on cash on hand can we continue paying our bills, and that we wanted it to be 120 days, or whatever it was, right, up to 300. That, which ones should we exclude that, right? I think that's some moving parts of it.
I think what you're trying to say though is, okay, so we adopted the Moody's piece of 120 to 300 days. And now we're really taking that next step, or talking about taking that next step of saying, all right, what makes up that? Not just that it's this amorphous amount.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to circle back to Natasha's comment about depreciation. It's in our rates, but that's the numbers. Generally, water, we use all of that for our capital spending on an annual basis. And the water, we do most of it except for those items, the dollars that are touched in this facility and for the power plant, but both of those have a principal and interest payment, not debt. That's all below the line that's even outside of that. So it's taking away from our cash at the end.
So you're using the depreciation money to replace water mains
In the water utility.
in the water
And the
utility?
same thing with electric poles and such.
Yeah, which to me would make sense.
It is, the big challenge really is that you're getting $1 of depreciation and you're spending $10 to put a new asset in. So that's where we're trying to obviously be frugal and try to manage, where the best bang for our buck is, and also find opportunities where we can extend infrastructure.
And if you think about a new entity, the first time you go to buy infrastructure and you finance it and you have to pay the loan back with interest, you're paying back the loan with interest with cash. And then you're getting your $1 depreciation per period. Now you get to the end, it's worn out and you have to spend $10. But you spent all that money all your cash went to paying for the loan with the interest. You have to set money aside earlier or you never get off the treadmill.
And Nate, to complicate your comment a little bit more, trying to do your calculation for cash on hand, it makes sense what you're saying. One's for operation, one is for future projects. Future projects isn't necessarily being used to, you're thinking not to use towards that calculation, right?
Yeah.
What about like the pilot? We're adding 112 every month into that bucket. Right now, we're not including that in the cash on hand because we know at some point that's going to be given to the city as part of that process. We can assume that would continue, but that probably needs to be looked at or spoken as well.
That's what restricted says it's unrestricted, but yet we're sort of restricting it again that way.
So I think first things first, what kinds of things do we want to designate money for that would make this 120 to 300 days more clear? And we can come back and take a second whack at the restricted, unrestricted, and at the what goes into the day's cash on hand, because that kind of flows out of what are we setting it aside for in the first place?
Exactly.
I got a feeling you're gonna take a couple more whacks and just one.
Yeah.
And personally, just simplify it. If we move some of those things out of unrestricted that really are restricted as long as we can, like the cafeteria plan and the pilot plan, that's one easy low-hanging fruit to get started with. And then, I mean, we don't have a plan yet, but what's our long-term plan for power, right? If we're gonna be potentially doing some things that require capital.
So I think that makes it a great example to talk about. So we don't necessarily know what we're gonna do for power yet. We're having a lot of talk. So I mean, Nick's got an example of renewable energy here. And we could say we want to designate money for renewable energy, or we want to designate money for a future project we think we're gonna do based on the end of our upcoming contract. And that would work. But at some point at time in the future, if we choose not to do that project, what happens to that money? Because it has to be redistributed. Something has to happen to it once that's not a project on. It's not a forever placeholder, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you have the other complicating component is that project's gonna cost X, but let's say $10 million, but you can only source 5 million of it. Is that okay? Is that the best use of the funds? Or do you want to pivot and not do any funds in that designation, but you want to do it on another project where you know you can fully fund it?
Is this something that we should be doing, or can others help us with this? I feel like I am not a financial investment person nor an accountant. Like, could others sort of come in and say, because doesn't the utility do these others?
We do, but I'll be honest, they're gonna ask you the same questions I'm asking you
This is
right
a
now.
policy discussion.
I don't know where you want to put your money. They're not gonna be able to tell you to put it in a certain spot. Like, where do you feel there's risk and that you want to have resources available?
But don't you think that they would say, for future appreciation, we recommend this percentage that you're putting into a special fund? They don't think these stuff like that.
They may have feedback. I just not sure if, they're gonna give you their opinion. I don't know if it's.
So a place for local policy, philosophy.
Most utilities, just like cities, aren't making these types of policies and decisions to.
Proactive.
They don't have the ability.
We just start with a couple of different ones that we'll agree on, and then keep chipping away at more each time.
Like what?
So, like the repair and replacement fund, which you could also call a depreciation type fund, right?
I like repair and replacement.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or you could do repair and replace it as one and depreciation as another, depends on how you want to look at it. You could do another one as future projects, maybe just have that as a generic placeholder for now, or capital improvements down the road, anticipated capital improvements. Debt service.
Which already exists.
Yep. And maybe if it's just labeled more clearly, right? Oh, it is pretty clear, isn't it? Doesn't get much clearer than electric debt service fund, I guess. And then, monies held that are like taxes and pilot payment. And then I know that we're transferring funds. So usually money that we receive from the city in a large amount, or we pay the city a large amount each month. I forget which one it is, but
You pay the city sewer bills every month.
that technically should be a restricted fund as well, I would think.
I think I'd push back on that. And I think I'd push back on the pilot payment even. I think in my mind, a fund is something that's longer than happens this calendar year.
I think restricted can be 1 second. Because if someone comes in and gives you deposit money and expects it back, it's not your money to spend.
Got me on that.
And that's what I'm just looking at, is what is our, not our money to spend is a larger amount.
I don't know what I'd name it, but the idea of a fund, because under the projects, we couldn't have predicted PFAS or lead water or some of that stuff. So a statute or law change risk is a risk, but the unfunded mandate, the what's coming next that we don't know about that we're gonna have to fund or pay for.
That's a good way of labeling it. It'd be nice to have some sort of label that it's harder so that we can defend why we have higher cash reserves, right?
Unfunded mandates. I kind of like that.
I like that. Because that's really why
I mean,
we're doing it, right?
yeah,
So we don't,
don't know what's around the corner, so it's hard to get too specific, but that at least gives some guidance.
yeah.
But in all of this, would we need to increase our cash reserve, and where are we getting that revenue from?
We're not talking about changing our revenue,
Okay, so we're
We're
not
just
talking about
talking
increasing
about-
the cash reserve.
how are we classifying where that revenue goes on the balance sheet?
It looks right on the balance sheet, we have $27 million unrestricted, that we have the ability to spend it as we wish. And that looks like a really high number, right? But it's not in all of our back of our minds, we're using that towards the terms we're saying, that's why it's so high, we're just not stating it.
We're using it for all the terms we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Obviously, with Moody's, they require 250 days of cash on hand as a baseline, and that number's increased over time in order of how they score us in the city for a rating methodology. 40% of their metrics that they use is based on cash situation of the community. So our liquidity is part of the reason the city has got a more favorable rating and keeps us at a good rating as well. So I think we want to maintain that. That's obviously another component of this beyond obviously having understanding the other needs that we have or other requirements we have.
Well, it goes a little bit, Nick, to what you had said before, but if you have $5 million in a fund, at the point in time you need it for a project, I think if you use the commission, you still have to decide what's the best way to fund the project.
Yeah.
Interest rates are
Put that in-
1%.
If that means that we keep it in cash so that we maintain the 280 days or 50 days or whatever it is at the time. I mean, borrow because it makes more sense, we can still do that. I mean, we're not saying you have to spend the money just because it's in there.
That was gonna be my point too, is that just because something's in a designated, doesn't show for calling it a designated fund. A designated fund doesn't mean we can't take the money out of that fund and move it over here if we have a need, thus eliminating the need for an emergency fund that's just sitting over there in case, for the day the tornado comes through, or whatever the emergency you need.
And do we have insurance that would cover a lot of these sort of emergencies to our equipment?
We do, we have insurance for all of our plants. It's just a matter of, are you negligent or not in the situation that occurs, right? If a tornado or something happens, obviously that's gonna get covered, but if it's prematurely fails and they feel like we didn't do the right type of maintenance or something, well, now it's a battle. I mean, if you look at all those, out in California, unfortunately, home buyers out there are fighting for insurance. So while we have it, I don't always like to just rest on the fact that we have insurance, just given the challenges sometimes.
And, like the CT wheels in the turbine. Those have an expected life, but if they don't make it to their expected life, that's not an insurance claim and we're replacing them early. Is it an emergency to have to replace them? Yes. Is it an insurance claim? Probably not. Did you have something? So for the next, go ahead.
Well, because we're talking, this is the cash on hand part of the policy, right?
Mhm.
And I think just fine. And so the policy seems to say that we're raising cash on hand in 300 days. Is that correct? Or that's a change in policy?
Our current policy set a target of 300 days of cash reserves, so it's been slowly drifting up over time.
Okay. if we at some point had 289 days, how would that affect our lease? Would it give us a different rating, or would they kind of give us a little zone?
They're using all the metrics to score you, to give you an ultimate rating of like AA, AAA, so on. So I think, I have it here,
It's
but
not just gonna be one thing that's gonna do it.
yeah, and there's, of course, it won't show it, all the pages are blank. Sorry. But within that, there's there's categories to say, if you have this amount, it's gonna be, this is what's gonna be graded in this quintile of all the things they're looking at. So 11 days less, I don't know if it's too detrimental, but if you're down to like maybe 250 or 200, now you're gonna start seeing yourself move. And then how that's scored with all the other metrics will determine what your ultimate rating is. So it could have an impact, it may not. Just depends on how everything else scores.
Yeah.
And it's so time sensitive too, giving them, you give it to them today versus next week or a month from now is some of it in exchange, like your cash.
I mean, I like what Nate is saying about having funds so you can see where it is, because part of me wonders, how do I know we're not being too aggressive? I know that the whole Moody's rating, but maybe it doesn't affect the Moody's rating really. Maybe we don't need to get all the way up to 300 cash on hand. And the reason I'm saying that is in order to do that, the ratepayers have to pay that. So do we really need it or not? I think that's a valid question to ask. And I don't know how we would answer them.
Well, I think starting to building up some of this stuff actually does do that. If you start to task staff with, the numbers behind what it would take to build repair and maintenance or depreciation fund, we're gonna take this from total swag to a lot less swag.
Question on cash in hand. Do you know if the M1, the credit that we receive for supplying or the contract with M1 being supplying power, is that coming in as income or is it just coming in as a credit towards our expense?
It's coming in at a lower expense.
So when we calculate our number of days of cash on hand, that's not part of the calculation.
So you're saying
Because it's not really an expense, it's part of the expense ratio, right? You follow
our
that?
wholesale power bill is less because of the credit.
Right.
Which ultimately the wholesale power bill is part of the calculation, so it would lower the days. Yeah, so if you incorporate it in completely, it would increase.
Your days are lower than we currently.
Correct, yes, the daily expense would increase, which ultimately would lower the days of cash on hand.
Huh, well, I wonder how many days that would change it.
That would be a good thing to wrap our hands around as we approach the end of our current arrangement.
Could change it potentially quite a bit. Huh. Basically, an expense from that is not showing up as an expense, it's just being credited, so it's not being part of it.
Yes. The expense is underrepresented.
Yeah.
7.6 million last year, so.
Well,
That would be expensive.
That's the credit.
So right now our daily cost is about 100,000 and increase it to about 121,000.
20%, so shorten your days by 20%.
So from 280, 56.
Mm-hmm.
That went way down to 224.
what's most?
Good stink. No.
So I think for next meeting, we've made good progress. For next meeting, we would like to see a draft with reserve and maintenance depreciation concept added in, with future projects fund added in, with unfunded mandate or something along that line added in. We'd like to see a whack at we'd like a better understanding of the restricted, unrestricted. Do we have any say in that or not? And even if we don't, then can we, within the unrestricted, can we somehow designate, what we think should be called restricted, unrestricted? And a whack at how those different funds would affect the cash on hand calculation, what would go into it, what wouldn't.
Sounded good, sure.
Might be a meeting or two before you see it.
The next time we see it,
And the other one for future consideration is the capital calls for ATC, because that could be a huge amount.
I could live with that.
But it's 10 million potentially.
Yeah, well, of course, what, that's
5 years.
a chunk of change.
Yeah.
There's a third of our cost.
I think I may have missed one in that list, but I think I probably have enough to choose.
That 25% ratio, the previous conversation, that will really throw that off.
Funded mandates in future projects.
Is if you took it out.
As far as the one things.
Yeah, then you can have a 50%.
Okay.
And Nate just said something about the ATC.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of revert back what I've heard and what I wrote down is the restricted, unrestricted, and how the unrestricted can be sliced, if you will, or designated. I've got depreciation, I've got unfunded mandate, got future projects, got the pilot cafeteria, looking at how that could be moved potentially. You had a repair and fix, was that one of them?
Repair and maintenance was depreciation, it's just whatever Nate said on.
Okay, and then I have the how the capital calls, and then how this impacts the cash calculation.
Should we, since they're doing this, throw in Nick's suggestion of, or discussion prompt of community support and economic development? So it fits in there and we can pull it out at some point in the future, but at least it's within context of what they're doing for us on this first whack at it.
We can see.
Yeah, where we can see better.
Because as we do deplete the commission designated fund over time and that goes away, then we don't have anything for community contribution.
Yeah. Mike,
Yeah.
I want to back along to our previous conversation from the last item, and that would be why, do you know why, if our total calculation of that 25% is based on our investments, but yet not all of our investments? So ATC is not part of that investment. So that 25% was based primarily off of all investments except for ATC.
That is the way that policy was built because ATC is not limited.
And because they could sell it, right? Potentially.
Probably could.
Yeah, we just think it over.
At the time that we built that policy, it says investment policy was built to be a short-term investment policy. That's why the term of the investments is limited to 5 years.
Okay. Gotcha.
And there's also a footnote, page number, but it says that specific investments not listed above will have their own individual commission policy, which you do have for ATC.
Okay. And if all assets stay the same and we shift to if we didn't add to our assets in the next 5 years, and you had to take 10 million out to put it in ATC, that would just mess up that 25% significantly. It was part of that question.
Yeah, actually, I think it's good that you want that thrown in there for discussion. I think that puts it right in front of where does the cash come from. Okay, consensus on that for direction for staff? Okay. Number 8, value of the utility.
Yes. So, first I want to thank Jessica for all her work on this, her creativity, and obviously supporting me as I've gone through many times, asking her to make little updates here and there. We provided the latest version, if you will. I hope it's near a final, if you will, to be presented to the common council. Steve Farag has indicated his penciled us in for the May 27th council meeting to be able to provide this presentation. So I'd welcome any feedback or thoughts that you might have on it.
I feel like you should have had like a bam, pow. Soundtrack as you were saying that.
Well, I was thinking we could all dress up as superheroes that night if you wanted to.
I don't, I'm pretty sure tights are not.
Sometimes it's less about you and more about leaving an impact.
That would be one. No, I love the energy in it.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
Really good.
I think we've got all the comments from last time incorporated, so.
Yeah. Good.
Makes you smile just looking at it.
Yeah.
That's fun.
What's that?
Show your son, show him.
Yeah, he was about it, yeah.
Okay. Any further suggestions for the team?
Once we get to the main meeting, we'll ask to see who's gonna attend. Obviously, you know, Natasha and Mike, I would expect them to, but if there's others, just so if they have to post or not. But obviously, we'd love to have everyone be able to make it, but we have realized that schedules make it.
On my calendar.
So it'll be May 27th, that usually they'll try to post towards the front, so it'll be around 6 people.
Okay, moving on to number 9, commission orientation. Oh, was it really commission orientation or is it just governance review?
Sorry, yes, I apologize, but yes, it would be governance review. So last year we did the full suite, now we're back into the 5-year review. So this year we have to take 12 policies. So I put 6 in the packet, thinking tonight was gonna be a short meeting, which I realized I mistakenly didn't hit the mark on it, but that's okay.
But these are the early policies and most of them are pretty boilerplate, so I think we're gonna knock through them pretty quick. It's my fervent hope. So we'll start with policy 1005, basis of authority. I got 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs up, 3.
You already, pause
I had no specific.
I didn't have, I skipped one, I'm sorry. Well, let's finish 1005, then we'll go back to 1000. Everybody's good on 1005?
Yep.
Then we'll skip back to 1000, the purpose of the commission, straight from the ordinance, pretty much. All good. Adoption or amendment of commission policies 1010. Our process for that.
How does that work with the 2 people? Like, let's say there was a policy and it didn't come up in the 5-year cycle, but it needed to be revisited. Like, do 2 people call you, like, how does that work?
Yep, they can do that, or Nick.
Or, okay.
Yeah, you can.
Email too.
Okay. Letter?
Who was it that I just saw? Some town in Wisconsin just recently was on Facebook apologizing for the US Postal Service losing the entire water bill mailing.
Yes.
Oh, please don't mail.
Just like.
Oh, yeah.
Nasty.
All right. Number 1015, conflicts of interest. I think this also got mirrors the city
Yeah, and state statutes.
and state statutes. 1020 code of conduct. This is a utility commission written and driven code of conduct. So I would really make sure that you take time to read through it, and we've all agreed to this. Did you give us?
6, I thought.
And the last one? Yeah, last one in 1025 harassment, which was a major rewrite the last time through.
Yeah. That was, so still look good to me.
Yeah,
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 okay.
it does.
It's only been a year, it makes it,
It does.
it helps.
Make it easy.
Yeah.
So no proposed changes in this batch. I'll roll them, mark them for review in 5 years this time, not 1 year.
Actually, 10-10.
10-10.
So the adoption or amendment of commission policies, the last one says the complete review every 5 years. Is there a reason that should change to 7 to match?
Other than congruity, no.
Just curious if 5 years was picked because it was a 5-year term, and we went through the whole cycle on one term, or?
We went through the cycle on one term because we had 3 new members or 4 new members. And we wanted to use that as an orientation process, so we went through them all in 1 year.
Okay.
But the 5 years was the original number, and the idea being we just wanted to make sure there was a tickler so that what Natasha alluded to, something never being reviewed didn't happen.
Yeah,
Okay.
like healthcare and so forth, 3 to 5 years is typically mandated. I'm not saying that utilities have to do it that way, but a lot of businesses do.
Not necessarily term, then term
Yeah.
7 years, so I got you.
Just think that's kind of far, okay?
Yeah, I mean, 5 sevens, I mean.
Yeah, I don't really
Feel
know
strong
either.
one way or the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's try to lighten our work, everyone.
Yeah, I was like already like, really, it says 28, we're 4 way ahead.
We're ahead of them.
All right. Moving along, number 10. I'm gonna wait for Nick to get his computer fixed though.
Yeah, sorry.
Does anybody need a 5-minute pie break or anything?
I really do that.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't, was there a change that you made?
Yeah, roll the pie. And we left off at number 10, KPIs. Nick gave us a nice colored graph, colored table to look at. And she might have some words on it too.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight a couple of them. So you probably saw the red in the middle, which is obviously not an area we'd like to be in, but it's for the rate of return on the water. It decreased from last year, this year was higher. You may remember that we had the $700,000 for the filter sand replacement. That was originally expected to be capital, that became operation and maintenance, which then basically reduced our net operating income, which is part of the calculation. So that it's low, but it's due to that change, if you will. So that one's explainable. And then as far as the water main breaks and the water, I think there's a couple things there just to keep in mind as it relates to those. Sorry, just finding my notes here. So the increase. So if you think back to last winter, I should say, it was a pretty moderate winter. We didn't have a lot of temperature extremes. So that we had a lower number of main breaks, partly because of that. Part of the reason we could see elevated numbers is this winter has been a little bit more up and down as temperatures go. Obviously, anytime we go from cold to warm, the frost starts coming out. It becomes cold again. Now the frost starts going back in. That creates movement in the ground, which then kind of impact those vulnerable spots in our system. That leads to main breaks. And then additionally, one thing that happens, unfortunately, more often than we'd like to see is water handling events. A lot of private companies, larger ones, have to, for insurance reasons, have to do fire flow tests, maybe on an annual basis or some frequency. And what happens is they do the fire flow, it's a huge amount of water, and you need to shut their valving off slowly. And if they shut it off quickly, obviously that water is flowing, all of a sudden it hits the stop and it has to reflect back, and then it creates a backwards pressure into the system, and then anything that's vulnerable or maybe maybe less rigorous will then lead to a leak. So those are the types of things that we've seen, and that's part of the reason why we've seen a slightly elevated number this year. I think overall, though, we are still trending in the right direction with our maintenance and all of our activity for capital and such. So
That's good. 2 questions though.
yeah.
On the water hammer event, if it's mostly the large company and fire, do we do education and reach out to them to try to educate them along helping us?
I don't know, John.
If we can determine that's what it is and who did it,
No,
yes.
I mean proactively, like,
Well, we do reach out to these guys quite often stating that, and for the most part, they're good. But sometimes when you have, like, say, 3 main breaks up on Central Avenue area, all in 24-hour period, you know something's going on that's not natural, right? But we couldn't find anything, type of thing. So, but yeah, we do, we do talk to the fire departments, because a lot of times they're the most culprits. Some, especially the rural guys, because if they go on the outskirts of the system, we do talk to them on occasion yearly to make sure that they're doing it. And Eric sends out letters to all the firefighting testing firms, and then of the year talking about that. So yeah, we do public education as much as we can.
don't expect you to have this answer off the top of your head, but I'm just drawing back to our last conversation, the filter sand replacement. Any idea when that was last done and what it cost last time?
It was part of the original build.
Yeah.
Um,
And when you build something like a water treatment facility like that, it's usually a lump sum price.
Sure.
So like $1.5 million full package turnkey. They really don't itemize things for you, so we really don't know what the initial price was.
But an example of that depreciation, repair and maintenance fund and the size those dollars can be.
Yeah, because my guess here, Patty probably look it up, it was probably around 1.2 million back in the day
I don't know.
for the entire turnkey.
It's just for that purpose.
Yeah, and this filter sand alone, just those 4 squares of filter sand cost us, what was that, $750,000?
Any other questions on KPIs? Moving on to number 11, more operational stats.
Yeah, so each April, we used to provide a much bigger packet, but now that we have KPIs, the packet's slimmed down, but there are still some annual things that we just want to provide updates just to keep you informed about. So I'm just gonna cover them at a high level, and as I go through, if there's questions or anything, just let me know. The first one is kind of the analysis on M1 that just shows a lot of the revenue side of it, the savings, and then the expense. As you can see, there's a positive net cash flow. Ultimately, that's all going back to our customers through lower power supply cost, either from our wholesale provider or from the revenue that we talked about earlier, that we have to put back, any revenue that we receive, go back to our customers through the PCAC charge. Obviously, the variability from year to year is just based on how much we run. And again, there's a number of variables between the price of natural gas, which is typically the most expensive operating component from an expense perspective, and how our cost, if you will, compares to the demand in the market, what the average price of the market is. So that's why you see 23 had more revenue from operating versus what 2024 has had or had. 2023, I think, is somewhat of an anomaly compared to what our history has been from an operational perspective. So it's that one. The next one is our payment history. I think the big thing here really is just that, our push, you can see we're at 70% electronic payments. Talking about the NEOS bill or the water bills that you're just mentioning, and the more individuals that we can get from a payment perspective, and obviously the billing as well to electronic, it takes that wild card out of the equation. So I think it's showing good push there, and we're still continuing to try to drive electronic payments to our customers. Next is the rainfall and how much pumping of water goes. You can see the green line is denoting how much we pump in the year. Blue is the amount of rainfall. In general, years that are dry, you're going to see higher pumpage because people are watering their lawns. And years that have a lot of rain are going to have less because they're not watering their lawns. When I was talking to John about it, one anomaly is 2022. If you remember, that's when the PFAS, all of our PFAS stuff started. So we weren't flushing our mains as much, so that also reduced our pumpage that year. So this is strictly pumpage. So if we have, you go to 2014, that was when it was really, really cold that winter. We had, it was like 75 main breaks.
77 main breaks, and we were running water in homes for the better part of 4 months.
So that's a year, obviously, we can see higher. You can see back in the late 80s, there were higher numbers back then. We had like the canning factory and other businesses that have obviously since closed. So that's part of the reason there higher numbers back then. Also, you have conservation. low flow toilets, things of that sort that are the other variable here. Next is the load growth. So a lot going on here. The right is energy and the left is capacity or megawatts. So if you look at the green line, that's kind of the energy. You can see that we're 375,000 gigawatt hours, or I'm sorry, 370 gigawatt hours or 370,000 megawatt hours. Whereas the blue and the red are the peaks from summer and winter, and that will be more on the megawatt side, the less scale. So you can see generally flat, if you will, to some degree throughout. A lot of variability there when it comes to the weather and other factors. Next is our solar interconnection. So this is giving you on the left is the count, which is lining up with the blue line. I guess it kind of looks both ways, if you will. Actually, no, I think the blue just denotes to the left for the count, and then the orange just denotes to the amount of kilowatts on the right. So you can see we've seen an uptick in 20 through 23, and then last year was somewhat of a downturn. I think there's a number of variables that play into it. Generally, what we find is that solar projects are not financially, they don't provide a return generally, unless there's a number of tax incentives. So that's partly what's in play. Also, a lot of times the financial means to be able to support some of these projects can vary, because you're talking tens of thousands or maybe $100,000. So that limits the ability. Plus, a majority of properties, think about your home. Do you have a south-facing roof that's going to be ideal? Do you have any trees in the way? Those types of things. There's a number of variables. So to see, is there a trend going on? I mean, I think there's interest of some people, and as there's more incentives from a tax base, maybe we'll see some uptick. But
It's also generational. We have an older community, and if they aren't expecting to be in their house for 15 or 20 years, then it's a big investment.
And I think there's also a factor of like the developers, those, you see them coming around and having opportunities to learn more about potential adding solar. The more uptick of that is that drives more interest, and may lead to more installations as well. And then lastly is the focus on energy. So I think the really interesting thing here is if you look at the yellow, so basically through your bills, for our electric bills, we're required to fund the focus on energy along with our low income assistance programs. So that's around $100,000 of investments, if you will, into focus on energy. The blue line denotes how much are we getting back. So you can see the incentives for our customers are receiving in 2024 reached almost $250,000. So 100,000 going in, 250,000 coming back in incentives. And then you can see that this goes back to the graph where we're looking at the electric. You can see there's 4 million kilowatt hours saved. In 2024.
Questions, comments, concerns?
It's good information.
Thank you for bringing it all at once instead of drips and drabs through the year. Moving on to number 12, the orthophosphate project bids.
So you remember a few months ago, we talked about orthophosphates in the plan in front of us. So Baxter Woodman, along with John, went out and requested bids. So we are looking for tonight for approval of the bid. Unfortunately, we only received one bid from August Winter and Sons out of Appleton, Wisconsin. It's just the nature of the beast, if you will. Sometimes you get a lot bidders, sometimes you don't. Our team, along with Baxter Woodman, believe that August Winter and Sons is qualified to complete the work for the project. And we recommend the commission approve the bid from August Winter and Sons for the orthophosphate unit system project.
Motion to approve by Nick, second by Gabrielle. Discussion. Natasha.
I just have a question on page 613, number 6. I just don't know why it's a different dollar amount. We've got 161.
Yes, so what we did was we did an alternate bid package, or an alternate to the package, to say if we were to use blue-white chem feed pumps versus the standard. what that cost difference would be. So, it came in higher, as you can see, the 174. So we're, electing or asking for your approval for the base package, the 161.
One question as well. It says that 161 or whatever it was on here, but then on the job orders, it says install orthophosphate equipment, and it says MU cost is 197.
Yeah. So the job order is going to be all inclusive of engineering services, analyst and labor.
Gotcha.
And, we are over budget on that, and I will get to that in a minute. So I don't know how you want to do this, if you're okay with approving this and, walk back on that, or if you want to accelerate the job order. Or if you want me just to explain how we're gonna cover the overage, I can do that too.
Everybody good with the vote, or do you wanna table it?
It's approve the good to be good, you know?
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Which moves us on to job orders, so you can tackle that.
Sure, so we have 519 for your consideration. So first is job order 5927, which is West Kelshed water main replacement. This project is Kelshed from Veterans Parkway to Sawyer. The estimated project cost is $163,169, and that doesn't match the amount that was budgeted for it. This is a city project for the road portion, which is a pulverize and repave. The next project is job order 5928, which is Apple and Depot water main. This is North Apple and East Depot replacement as well. The total estimated project is $151,424.56. The budget was $170, so it's about $19,000 under budget. This is again a city project for pulverize and repave. Next is job order 5930, South Maple water main replacement. This is an 8-inch pipe first from 17th to 21st, and then a 12-inch directional drilling from 25th to 29th. This project job order is for $480,283.81, and the budget was $481. This is an overlay, and we'll also be working with the city in conjunction with the work that they're doing for wastewater and other things in that project. Next is the orthophosphate job order, which is 5906. This is installing of the orthophosphate equipment at the water treatment facility, south side of Wildwood Booster. As Nate mentioned earlier, the total project estimated cost is $197,927.94. The budget that we had was $132,000 in the capital budget, so as you can see, we're about $65,000 over. And I brought it, I had a note, but I didn't know where I left it. Sorry, but essentially, let's see here. So we were talking before about the capital budget and how it's set based on the depreciation that's within our rates. And this year, when you approve the capital budget, we went a little bit higher than what was in the rates, knowing that the water rate case was going to get approved or go through the process this year. So what I did was I went and forecasted. So based on if the water rate case goes into effect here at May 1st, we expect to receive over about $91,000 more of depreciation this year than we had included in the capital budget. So that more than covers the overture on the $65,000. So that's where the dollars will come from, if you will, to cover this change. And then lastly is job order 18342. This is the rebuild the overhead line on South Washington between 29th and 17th Street. The line will be rebuilt as a single phase. The total project estimate is $91,236, and the capital budget was for $110,000.
Okay.
So, you're gonna use that extra money from the increased water rates, but you've also saved money. Looks like 20,000. We've got another 20,000. So that 40,000, does that just go back into the general fund that you're just not spending it, or is that eventually that would be back into like the depreciation fund?
I mean, it's cash not spent, so ultimately, yeah, it would be part of our general cash holdings. Keep in mind though, we talked about earlier, emergencies that come up, so we may have main breaks on the L&M side of things where expenses might be higher. You know, when we get to the financials, you see the water is slightly over this year on financials, at least year to date. So it's all part of that, if you will.
It becomes profit if we don't spend it by the end of the year. And then the profit is what becomes cash holdings.
What caused the overage on 5927? It's 47 cents.
All right.
We'll try harder next time.
If it's not a complicated answer, how does the rate case approval change the amount of depreciation that we get this year?
Well, rates are set up for, there's a revenue requirement, right, which is the rates, and then the expense includes depreciation. So we will be collecting additional depreciation dollars through the rates that we would not have received otherwise.
Yes, because the budget amount was based on our old depreciation amount from the last rate case. And the depreciation amount in this rate case increased.
Okay.
It's the timing of it.
Got
Due
it.
to new.
Yeah, the depreciation in old rates is about 1.33 million, and the budget you approved was 1.37 million, so slightly higher, but we knew that the rate case would come into effect. The new depreciation will be 1.522 million. So next year's capital budget for water will probably elevate, depending on where you go with the restricted funds. To remit that work on.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the job orders?
I approve the job order.
By Natasha, second. Nick? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Bills and payroll.
Bills have been reviewed and certified good for payment.
Is there a motion to approve the bills and payroll?
So,
Gabrielle, did you want a second, Paul?
Sure.
Second by Paul.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do we have a policy for what our target goal is for overtime pay? Because I noticed it was 4%, but I don't know if that's a goal for it or how much.
No, unfortunately, I would say a majority of the items, like if you look at our office team, their overtime is they have very limited overtime, and it's generally being a customer call right before 4 o'clock, so they work a little bit extra. When you look at our electric and water teams, generally they're dealing with outages or main breaks. With main breaks, outages, for the most part, they'll take care of them unless it's maybe a garage that's not being used or something, that type of a situation, but normally they're fixed. Water main breaks, they'll take a look at it. If there's any concern with discolored water or public safety, they're generally gonna take care of it, which will lead to overtime. So ultimately, those are items we can't necessarily control. The only other time that I can think of from overtime that comes up from time to time is we may have situations where we need to take an outage for a business, and business is like, hey, I'm open when you're open, I need you to come in earlier or later. Same thing with main breaks, we made some adjust, or even water services, we've moved around just to help accommodate, I think one was by the school, and we didn't want to be having all the road construction and mass chaos of all the cars are coming on. So generally our overtime, we track it, but it's not something we have a metric just because of the nature of we have to do it.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Bills and payroll are approved. Previous meeting minutes from the March 10th, 2025 meeting. Motion to approve those by Nick, second by Natasha. Any changes? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Back to you for financial reports.
They included this month are the March cash reports and the February financials. And just wanted to note that we did add the bond rating to the balance sheet, just in the description, just to put in like a KPI out there, just edit there.
Okay. Questions on the financial reports? Natasha first, then Nate.
I just noticed the year-to-date water losses was 9.36%, and we had the water rate case, but is it because it hadn't come into effect? Is that why the?
Water losses just happen.
This is concrete water loss.
Correct, yeah.
So,
So if you go back to before with the KPIs, the higher main breaks,
okay,
the more water loss.
okay.
And because it's been a long time since we had large water losses, what's the number, the water loss percentage where you guys really start to pay attention?
I think any deviation that's unexplainable, we're watching for, but I think it was 15% is the number from a national perspective. It's kind of the benchmark. And we're in a very good spot for water and electric loss.
Nate, did you have a question too?
Yeah, quick question. I saw on page 2 of the cash report. It says in the bottom there, I've seen this before, but I never caught the difference here. It says minimum days cash on hand, 60 days. If you go to page 4, it's 90 days, right? Or 180 days. So 120 days, I'm sorry. So just curious. There's a reason.
And our policy is at 120, so I think that page is behind.
Okay. Page 2 should be 120, then not 60.
I think.
Well, it shows 120 and it shows 60.
What?
Yeah.
Oh. Huh. How come?
So the 120 was I think that is the minimum,
In the policy.
but 300 is the target. The 60 denotes liquid cash. How much we actually have in LGIP, I should say in Forward Bank or wherever our local bank is. That's where that 60 component, why that's there. So we can't invest that those dollars shouldn't be invested at all.
I think 60 times 2, that's 6.3 million times 2 for the 120 days is the same thing, just twice. Right? So I think it must include the same things.
One's just showing 60, like Nick said, it's just money that we are not to be investing. It needs to be liquid. So in checking or savings. And then the 120 is the policy, the minimum.
Okay.
Let me do it differently. So on the left, you can see reserve calculation. You can see the first line shows the 280 days of cash on hand that we currently have. The next line is showing the 120, which is the minimum set in your commission policy. Below there's actual cash on hand. So this is physical cash. So we can see that forward we have a 14.8, but we're required to have 6.4.
Okay.
That can't be invested in CDs or the federal loan program or anything like that.
Gotcha.
It has to stay liquid.
Yeah, liquid. I mean, I know there could be an argument that CDs are liquid, but there's obviously such a loss there.
Gotcha.
Good question.
If you want
Any
to
others?
simplify it, I'd be all.
No, yeah. I just curious why it was there, yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah.
If there's no other questions, motion to adjourn
I will.
by Paul, second by Gabrielle. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
Move.